No one ever imagined that a modest sword instructor from the countryside would end up training some of the most powerful warriors on the continent. He had spent his life in a quiet dojo, passed down through generations, far from the grand halls of the capital. From the moment he could walk, he had trained with the sword, but despite years of dedication, his skill was always just a little above average, enough to be respected, but never celebrated. Realizing he wasn't destined for glory, he chose to stay behind and inherit his father's dojo. Though he lacked brilliance on the battlefield, he possessed a rare gift for teaching, and it showed. Every student who trained under him eventually rose to greatness. Still, he remained in the shadows, content in his role as a mentor. 20 years passed, he was nearing 40 now, and with age came the inevitable pressure to settle down. His aging father, frustrated and desperate for grandchildren, reminded him daily that time was running out. Oddly enough, despite having trained several talented young women over the years, not a single romance had blossomed. The thought that he might never see his son married gnawed at the old man relentlessly. But then, something unexpected happened. One day, a former student appeared at the dojo. Her name was Thea, a name now known across the land. She had once been a determined young trainee. Now she stood as the commander of the Royal Knights. She wasn't there for a casual visit. With the authority of her position, Thea had recommended her former teacher for the role of special instructor to the Royal Knights. She had even brought a formal appointment letter signed by the Duke himself. A carriage waited outside, ready to escort him to the capital. It was already decided. He was stunned. This was no invitation. It was a royal order. Refusal wouldn't mean death, perhaps, but it would bring serious consequences. And, as if that weren't enough, his father encouraged him to accept the offer and to bring back a wife while he was at it. If all else failed, he even joked that Thea would be a suitable match. Embarrassed beyond words, the swordsman tried to dismiss the idea, especially since there was a significant age gap between them. But surprisingly, Thea only blushed slightly and said nothing. So, with no time to process what was happening, he found himself on the road to the capital. Along the way, he noticed the sword strapped to Thea's side. It was the same one he had given her when she first left the dojo. Though pleased, he couldn't help but feel it was no longer worthy of someone of her stature. Thea disagreed. To her, it was the perfect sword, an extension of herself, just as it had always been. In her eyes, her master was still the strongest. He didn't feel like he deserved the title of special instructor. He believed he was too old, too far removed from the world of knights and adventurers. But Thea had absolute faith in him. She reminded him that many of the continent's finest warriors had trained under him. His reputation, she said, had quietly grown. He was now known across the land as the Sword Saint of the countryside. The next morning, he stood before a vast crowd of knights ready to teach. Nervous and unsure, he heard Thea publicly declare that even she couldn't defeat him at full strength. The praise made him even more anxious, but he had no choice. He would give it everything he had, whether or not his skills were still sharp enough. Not everyone welcomed him warmly. A blonde-haired knight in the crowd looked especially displeased. Understandably so. A rural outsider, dropped into their ranks as an instructor, was bound to stir resentment. Later, Thea assured him that he only needed to visit the capital a few times each month, so he could still run the dojo back home. That eased his worries. Just then, another young woman came running toward him, calling him Master. It was Chloe, another former student. Though she had only trained with him for 2 years, her determination had never wavered. Now, a full member of the Royal Knights, she had fulfilled her dream. Seeing her among the knights brought him a deep sense of pride. Since it wasn't yet time for his first training session, the swordsman returned to his countryside home that evening. But the moment he opened the door, he froze. There was a guest waiting inside. It was one of his former students, and this unexpected reunion brought a wave of emotion. He hadn't expected to meet 3 of his disciples within just 2 days. This one, however, hadn't come alone. He had brought a child with him. Before the swordsman could process everything, his father stepped in with a grin and declared, "You're not needed here anymore." He insisted that his son could now focus entirely on his new life in the capital, as a royal instructor, and more importantly, as a man expected to settle down and finally have a child of his own. It turned out the visiting disciple was no ordinary man, a seasoned platinum-ranked adventurer. He had earned quite a bit over the years, but with the birth of his first child, the risks of the adventuring life had begun to outweigh the rewards. Wanting a quieter, more stable life, he had chosen to return to the village. Since he was well versed in the dojo's training methods, the old master saw an opportunity. He handed over the dojo to this former student, effectively freeing his son of any lingering obligations to stay. With no more excuses left, the swordsman returned to the capital the very next morning and sought out Thea for help. Living in an inn was proving too expensive, and he needed to find a modest place to rent. Hearing this, Thea casually suggested that he could just live with her.
そうですか。
The words nearly gave him a heart attack. Was this some kind of city dweller humor? He wasn't sure. Before he could respond, Thea changed the subject and offered to take him out for something to eat. Their walk soon turned into a relaxed stroll through the market, and with food and conversation flowing easily, Thea began to feel like they were on a date. That feeling was shattered when a voice called out behind them, sharp, familiar, and laced with sarcasm. A royal commander walking around with a country bumpkin. How embarrassing! Startled, the swordsman instinctively turned his face away and stepped back. The speaker was none other than Thea's longtime rival, Selena. Thea clearly didn't want to engage and tried to move on. But Selena wasn't about to let them off so easily. She approached, demanding to know who the man was, even attempting to pull back his hood to get a look at his face. What she saw left her speechless. Her expression shifted in an instant. Recognition, disbelief, and a touch of awe. This man was her master. It had been 20 years, and neither of them had recognized the other right away. Only when Selena began recalling events from her childhood did the swordsman finally remember. She had trained at his dojo. She had always wanted to return and share her achievements with him. Flustered, she apologized for not coming sooner. The swordsman waved it off with a warm smile. After all, she had done incredibly well, rising to the rank of a black-tier adventurer. Selena was thrilled but confused. Why was her esteemed master walking around the capital with someone like Thea? Thea bristled at the insult and immediately snapped back, informing Selena that their master was now the special instructor for the Royal Knights, and that she was helping him find a place to live. Selena admitted that the appointment made sense. With his experience and legacy, the position was well earned. But when it came to real estate, she insisted that she was far more qualified than Thea. As an agent for visiting adventurers, she knew the city inside and out, unlike Thea, who hadn't even lived in a proper apartment. True to her word, Selena quickly found the swordsman a suitable home. Though the city lifestyle was foreign and slightly overwhelming, he was grateful to have former students watching over him. The next morning, he accompanied Thea to the Knights' training grounds. As she outlined the day's schedule, a stern figure approached, the blonde vice commander, the same one who had glared at him days before. With a solemn expression, he stepped in front of the swordsman and declared that someone holding the title of instructor must prove their strength. He challenged the older man to a duel. The swordsman was taken aback, unsure of how to respond. But before he could speak, Thea answered on his behalf, accepting the challenge without hesitation. Whispers rippled through the gathered knights. They had all heard tales of the sword saint of the countryside, but none had ever seen him in action. Curiosity buzzed in the air. The swordsman himself had never fought anyone from the capital, and though he didn't expect to win, he hoped at least not to embarrass himself. For Thea, after a respectful bow, the duel began. The vice commander was aggressive from the first move, every strike aimed with precision and force, clearly targeting vital points. One moment of hesitation, and it would be over. But while the onlookers grew tense, Thea remained calm, because she knew, deep down, without a shred of doubt, that this man, her master, was far beyond the reach of ordinary knights. As long as one could redirect the flow of power, victory was possible. But after losing to the swordsman in a single clean move, the blonde vice commander's pride would not allow him to hold back any longer. His attacks intensified. Blades struck faster, heavier, and with relentless aggression, leaving the swordsman no room to breathe. Though it was clear the younger man had the advantage in both speed and strength, the veteran swordsman began to observe a pattern. His opponent's movements, while powerful, were repetitive. Timing his counters with calm precision, the swordsman disrupted the vice commander's rhythm, forcing him to adjust mid-combat. Frustrated, the blonde knight finally resorted to his signature technique, the whirlwind cleave. A strike known for being unstoppable. Whether blocked or dodged, it tore through defense and evasion alike. Spectators held their breath, but in a stunning moment, the swordsman slipped just outside the arc of the blade, and with one simple, decisive movement, broke through the famed technique. The fight ended just like that. Silence fell over the field. The vice commander, stunned by the outcome, could only accept defeat. What followed was even more surprising. He immediately became one of the swordsman's most enthusiastic admirers, and the rest of the knights, they were awestruck. Reverence filled the air. Later, the blonde knight approached the swordsman to apologize for his earlier disrespect, and also asked, genuinely curious, how his unbeatable technique had been countered. The swordsman, ever humble, replied with a light chuckle, "I simply spun with you. If your execution had been even slightly faster, I'd have been helpless." Elsewhere, back in the countryside, the old master sat with the veteran adventurer, Reed, and expressed his gratitude. He had always believed that his son's talent should not be wasted in a rural dojo. Reed agreed wholeheartedly. In all his years traveling as an adventurer, he had never met anyone with swordsmanship more refined than his masters. He smiled. "Now only you're left, Beryl." In the weeks that followed, the swordsman gradually grew accustomed to his new role as special instructor. Every time he offered one-on-one sword guidance, the training grounds would go silent. Even those not directly involved would stop what they were doing, afraid to miss even a single word. His quiet authority had taken root. After one such session, Colony, one of the younger knights, approached him. She offered to show him around the area, since he had only been in the city for a week and still wasn't familiar with the streets. Meanwhile, Thea was elsewhere, reporting the progress to the higher-ups, though some among the leadership still had reservations about the the newly appointed instructor, Thea urged them to be patient. In fact, she confessed that his performance had far exceeded her expectations. If being skilled in martial arts alone were enough to lead an organization, things would be much simpler. But Thea couldn't picture her master simply sitting behind a desk. She remembered the first time they met. Her family had moved to the countryside when she was just a girl, and to help her learn to defend herself, her parents brought her to the most respected dojo in the region. That's where she met him. At the time, he was just a kind older man to her, gentle, attentive, and endlessly patient. In training, he never overlooked the smallest details. His lessons were filled with knowledge she had never encountered before. For the first year and a half, she did nothing but repeat the fundamentals every single day. But rather than boredom, she felt something else: growth, strength, confidence, and praise. Even for the smallest improvements, he praised her sincerely. That was the most motivating thing of all. It wasn't until she sparred against him that she realized just how vast the gap was. Not a single opening, not a single wasted movement. His strength felt immeasurable. Back then, she assumed all sword instructors were like him. But when her dojo later participated in regional matches, Thea was shocked. Their students overwhelmingly defeated students from other schools, and even their instructors. None of them came close to matching her master, but the swordsman never let it go to his head. Instead, he reminded everyone that the true goal wasn't victory, it was learning, to see what the battle could teach you. Snapping out of her memories, Thea suddenly realized something was missing: her sword. She must have left it back at the dojo. Just as Thea stepped back into the dojo, she spotted her missing head ornament, but something was wrong. A few of the disciples had already picked it up, but instead of returning it, they tossed it aside with disdain. Their pride, still bruised from having lost to a country girl, they weren't done yet. They wanted to teach Thea a lesson. One of them, a tall youth with unruly long hair, stepped forward and raised his wooden sword. But before the blow could land, the swordsman appeared out of nowhere, blocking the attack with his own body. The long-haired youth attempted to strike again, but this time, the swordsman moved faster than the eye could follow, disarming the boy in one fluid motion and knocking down the rest of the troublemakers in the blink of an eye. The long-haired disciple stood frozen in place, preparing to launch a sneak attack while the swordsman was picking up Thea's headpiece. But before he could act, another strike intercepted him. This time, the intervention came from his own master, who, upon realizing his students had caused the incident, dropped to his knees without hesitation to apologize. Later, on the walk back, Thea couldn't stop blaming herself. "I got you hurt," she said. But the swordsman simply shook his head with a small smile. "No, you didn't do anything wrong," he said. "If there's anyone to blame, it's me, for letting you go back alone. I should have known better. It was too dangerous." Thea's eyes shimmered, but she nodded, relieved that he didn't hold it against her. Time passed. One day, Thea stood across from her teacher again, sword in hand. This time, the fight was different. She saw an opening, just a flicker, and seized it. Her blade landed true. She had finally defeated him. He knew then that there was nothing more he could teach her. As a parting gift, he handed her a sword he had forged himself. A simple iron blade, but one crafted with care and legacy. Thea didn't want to leave, but she accepted the sword with trembling hands, swallowing the sadness in her chest. She didn't want to become a burden. She had to move forward. After leaving the dojo, Thea set her sights on the Night Order entrance trials. She wasn't just chasing a rank. She wanted to prove to the world that her teacher's swordsmanship was unmatched. During the trials, even the main examiners and the other top candidates couldn't match the speed and discipline that her training had given her. She finished first, and with that, Thea was accepted into the Night Order with top honors. But she wasn't satisfied. She made herself a promise. Her master's sword must not be buried in obscurity. So she fought hard, rising through the ranks with unmatched determination until she became captain of the order. It took 10 years, but eventually, she earned the authority to appoint a teaching instructor, and without hesitation, she returned to her roots, to him. The swordsman hadn't lost a step. In fact, after all these years, his blade had only grown sharper, his presence more formidable. Some in the order scoffed at her for bringing in a rural teacher, but Thea didn't care. He deserved a greater stage, and she would be the one to give it to him. When Thea arrived at the training field that day, she expected to see the swordsman. Instead, she found the blonde vice commander. "Looking for the instructor?" he asked casually. Too late. Colony already dragged him off to go shopping.
何かおっしゃいましたか?
Meanwhile, in the city's entertainment district, Colony was leading the swordsman through the streets. He glanced around, amused. "Isn't the North District more popular for sightseeing?" Colony scoffed. "That's where tourists from the countryside go. This area's better." The swordsman didn't reply, but he couldn't help raising an eyebrow. "She knows I'm from the countryside too, right?" Just then, a voice called out from behind. "Master!" He turned. A young woman with sleek black hair approached. Someone familiar, but not immediately recognizable. It wasn't until he noticed the iron sword at her waist that it clicked. "Faith?" Faith?" he asked. She smiled. "It's been a while, 5 years to be exact. Back then, she'd been one of his sword students. Now, she was a top mage of the Royal Mage Corps." The swordsman blinked. "Wait, you became a magician? I taught swordsmanship." Colony jumped in. "You're here shopping?" Faith nodded. "For magical tools." She showed them a few special items that allowed ordinary people to harness magical abilities. The only catch, they were extremely expensive. To demonstrate, Faith summoned magic around her palm, showing them how the tools worked. The swordsman watched, clearly impressed. Though Faith had strayed from the path of the sword, he was proud of the strength she'd found. Suddenly, a commotion broke out nearby. An old woman had been robbed. The swordsman prepared to step in, but Faith raised a hand, stopping him. She drew her sword, and with a whisper of magic, it shimmered with energy. She slashed towards the fleeing thief. In an instant, her sword arc transformed into a binding chain of energy, wrapping around the thief and pulling him to the ground. The crowd gasped. Her technique, a fusion of magic and swordsmanship, was seamless. "Everything I used just now," she said to her old master, "came from the sword style you taught me. Without your training, I couldn't have done this." The next morning, the swordsman was enjoying a walk at dawn. A voice called out behind him, "Hey, are you the swordmaster from the countryside?" "I'm Lucy," hands on her hips, "captain of the kingdom's mage corps." The swordsman nearly laughed. He thought she was pretending, playing some sort of noble-themed make-believe, like city kids often did, but Lucy just sighed. With a flick of her wrist, she summoned a blazing sigil into the air. Flames swirled around her. Only then did the swordsman realize she wasn't joking. "Faith told me you were here," Lucy continued. "I wanted to see for myself what kind of man could have trained someone like her." Before he could respond, Lucy was already leading him to a nearby training field. As a prodigy who spent every day refining her craft, Lucy was constantly seeking to test her limits. Lucy asked him to get ready, but he found her request a bit unreasonable. She was, after all, the commander of the kingdom's mage corps. He was just a countryside sword instructor. Even without thinking too hard, it was obvious he stood no chance. But Lucy didn't care what he thought. Without warning, she gathered all her flames into a massive fireball and hurled it at him. He managed to dodge in time, but the moment he steadied himself, she unleashed a barrage of smaller fireballs in quick succession. He dodged again. Seeing that he could still easily evade her attacks, Lucy switched to ice magic. The swordsman, in a swift motion, he cut every block down into shards. Now it was his turn to strike, but he didn't want to injure Lucy. So instead of using the blade, he aimed to knock her out with the hilt of his sword. Just as he closed in, Lucy suddenly surrounded herself in flames again, forcing him to back off instantly. Once the flames dissipated, she resumed her assault with another wave of fireballs. All he could do was keep dodging. This was his first real fight against a mage, and it was painfully clear her magic had a natural advantage over his swordsmanship. Recognizing that he wasn't just some pushover, Lucy decided to bring out her strongest spell. That instantly unsettled him. He realized that if he didn't start taking this seriously, he might really be done for. Just as he prepared to launch his counterattack, he abruptly froze. In the next second, a powerful wave of pressure hit him. Lucy was now surrounded by a warped, dark aura. The energy twisted around her violently, as if it could devour everything in its path. He was glad he hadn't moved, but then Lucy stopped. With a sigh, she backed down, admitting she had taken things too far, like a child throwing a tantrum. Besides, the swordsman hadn't even fought back in the end. There was no reason to continue. He sheathed his sword and asked what would have happened if her final spell had actually hit him. "Worst case," Lucy said casually, "you'd just be flattened into a pile of meat. Not completely pulp, but close." Still, she acknowledged his strength. It finally made sense to her why Faith looked up to him so much, but the swordsman remained modest. He said that if Lucy had really gone all out from the start, he'd be dead already. He had trained with the sword for years, and not even his old man had ever beaten him. That caught Lucy's attention. Now she was really curious. Just what kind of monsters were in this man's family? In the end, Lucy apologized for getting carried away and invited him to visit the Mage Academy sometime if he had the chance.
新しい魔法の研究が進んだらまた試させてもらうぞ。
それはお断りします。
The next day came quickly. As the swordsman finished work and was just about to head home, he unexpectedly ran into Faith, who was delivering a batch of magic potions to the Night Corps. The moment the swordsman caught a glimpse of the potions, he recognized their high grade, far superior to the herbal remedies he usually relied on. Faith stepped forward and handed him one. "Here, this is from our captain," he said with a faint smile. The swordsman waved his hand, politely refusing, but Faith insisted. "It's an apology gift. She told me to bring it personally. The swordsman paused. So that little girl really was the captain of the Mage Corps? Faith simply nodded. Lucy used magic to maintain her youthful appearance, so very few knew her real age. The swordsman gave a bitter chuckle, recalling how she had mercilessly battered him with fire and ice, and that terrifying final spell. He had nearly been flattened into pulp. "I've made up my mind," he muttered. "Never fighting another mage again." Faith chuckled quietly. "Don't lump all mages in with Lucy. She's unique. Ordinary magicians can't even cast spells in such rapid succession." At that moment, Zia approached. Faith took it as his cue to leave. Waving as he walked off, Jia had come on behalf of Serena. She needed a favor. The guild had a request. Serena wanted the swordsman to help train a group of new adventurers. She even brought a handwritten note from the guild master to show how serious the matter was. The task itself was simple: guide the rookies through their first dungeon raid. That word, dungeon, brought back memories. The swordsman had once braved a dungeon himself, back in his reckless youth. It had been one of those old monster vaults where beasts stored their stolen treasures. He'd rushed in full of bravado and had been beaten half to death. He barely escaped with his life. Remembering that, he was about to decline, but Sia urged him to reconsider. She reminded him that, as an honorary instructor of the Night Corps, there were no restrictions on his activities. Whether or not to accept the job was entirely up to him. Eventually, he found himself standing at the entrance to the Adventurers Guild. He stepped inside, his eyes widened. Lucy was already there, waiting. As it turned out, she had come specifically to vouch for him. Word had spread that he might be helping out at the guild. After the introductions, the guild master personally thanked the swordsman for coming, but the swordsman was baffled. He hadn't agreed to anything. He was just there to take a look. Before he could speak, the guild master introduced his assistant, Megan, to the swordsman. He would be responsible for explaining the details of the cooperation. But before getting to that, Megan voiced a concern. Even though Serena and Lucy had both vouched for the swordsman, he personally had zero experience as an adventurer. Hearing this actually made the swordsman quietly happy, because if Megan kept doubting him like this, he could just use that as an excuse to walk away from the request altogether. But the very next moment, his hopes were crushed. Megan suggested a duel. If the swordsman could beat Serena in a match, Megan would drop all objections. Soon after, the two stood face to face in the training arena. Serena was visibly excited. She had waited a long time. Her thoughts drifted back to her childhood. She remembered being out on a long journey with her parents when their group was ambushed by a wild beast. In desperation, her parents had pushed her off a cliff to save her life. When she came to, she had already been rescued by him. At first, she couldn't accept the fact that her parents had died for her, but one morning, following his advice, she picked up a sword. He noticed her natural potential immediately. From then on, Serena began to train under him. Over time, her spirit slowly returned, but those days didn't last. His father had eventually found a kind family willing to take Serena in. She had wanted to stay by the swordsman's side, but she knew that desire was selfish, so with tears in her eyes, she chose to leave. Years passed. Now she was a gold-ranked adventurer. On one mission, her teammates casually asked why she had become an adventurer, but before she could answer, their group was suddenly surrounded by bandits. Even so, she knew the answer deep inside. "I wanted to protect people from ending up like the old me, and to use the sword he gave me." It had been 20 years since she'd seen her master, and more than anything, she wanted him to witness her growth. Back in the arena, after exchanging salutes, she was the first to attack. Her strikes were sharp and fast. The swordsman parried each one calmly, but inside he was proud. She had become strong. For Serena, this moment had been her dream, to trade real blows with the one who once saved her. But as they fought, the swordsman carefully watched her form, and eventually, he saw it, her one remaining weakness. That was all it took. The match ended in his favor. Everyone watching was stunned. The legends about the quiet man from the countryside hadn't been lies after all. Still, the swordsman remained modest. He admitted that if the fight had gone on for 10 more seconds, his stamina wouldn't have lasted. He had simply caught the fact that Serena still hadn't fully trained her left hand. Serena was shocked. She hadn't thought anyone would notice something like that. Megan, now completely convinced, apologized for his earlier skepticism. The guildmaster officially entrusted the newcomer training project to the swordsman. The swordsman didn't know whether to laugh or sigh. In the end, he'd still been roped into it. The next day, the swordsman and Serena led 3 fresh recruits into a mountain cave. Thanks to their magic detection tools, the rookies quickly spotted goblins up ahead and charged in without hesitation. Within minutes, they were sweeping through the cave, clearing out every goblin and beast in sight. But just as they were about to leave, Serena paused. Something felt off. The number of monsters seemed suspiciously low. She barely got the words out when one of the recruits' magic tool shattered in his hand, and the green-haired rookie was suddenly sent flying by a massive claw. The swordsman immediately ordered the remaining two to stay put. Then he and Serena dashed towards the danger. What stood before them was no ordinary creature. It was a designated target class monster, a named beast with massive power, the kind that required special guild authorization just to engage. Looking at it, Serena finally understood why the monster count had been so low. It had devoured the competition. The swordsman, meanwhile, was already annoyed. First day mentoring, and this is what he had to deal with. He turned to Serena and asked if she had any healing potions. She had 2. Originally, he planned to have her handle the beast while he went to pull the green-haired rookie to safety. He reached out for a potion, but Serena stepped in firmly, nodding. "I understand," she said. "I'll handle the retreat. You take care of this." With that, she turned and sprinted toward the injured recruit. At that moment, the beast lunged. The swordsman barely dodged, but he knew there was no backing down now. He tightened his grip, lowered his stance, and prepared to fight. They clashed again and again, but the monster was powerful, and its hide was thick. When he finally landed a hit to its thigh, his sword barely left a scratch. "If it lands a proper kick, I'm done," he muttered grimly. Meanwhile, Serena had grabbed the green-haired rookie and was heading back into the cave. The swordsman knew he had to buy them more time. Just as he was repositioning, the beast spun suddenly and smacked him aside like a ragdoll. He landed in a roll, barely staying upright, but his arm was bleeding, claws having torn into his flesh. Gritting his teeth, he guessed the weak spot had to be the face. He adjusted his posture and prepared to strike again. But just then, the monster opened its jaws and fired a massive burst of flame right at him. Just as the beast unleashed a flaming barrage, the swordsman darted sideways, attempting to flank it, but the creature responded instantly, vanishing in a blur and reappearing with a crushing tail sweep aimed right at him. He ducked, narrowly avoiding the blow, then countered, his blade slicing the tail clean in 2. That, however, only enraged the monster. With a guttural roar, it fired another blast of fire, and before he could regain position, the beast lunged forward with enough power to tear through the forest itself. But even as the ground trembled beneath his feet, the swordsman managed to smirk. He'd bought Serena the time she needed. Seizing the moment, he scrambled up the beast's back, but to his surprise, it charged straight out of the forest. Then it took to the sky, high above the treetops. Through clouds and cold wind, the swordsman held on tight as the beast soared. But the ride didn't last. With a crash, the beast landed and flung the swordsman off like a rag doll. And in the next instant, the monster activated a domain ability, turning the very earth beneath them into a molten hell. The swordsman leapt onto a nearby rock just in time, but the lava was spreading fast, crawling outward in all directions. It was already seeping into the cave. Inside, Serena and one of the rookies were helping the injured green-haired recruit retreat deeper into the tunnels. But the boiling rock was raining down from above. By the time they looked up, the cave was nearly sealed in lava. The girl could only scream in helpless despair. Outside, hearing that cry, the swordsman understood. There was no time left. Ignoring the pain in his arm and the heat beneath his feet, he ran straight across the molten battlefield, charging the beast once more. The monster was now fully berserk. It roared and hurled fireballs at him non-stop. He dodged left, then right, but a sudden explosion caught him off guard and sent him flying. But he wasn't done. Using the momentum, he surged forward mid-air, drawing his sword, and with one final leap, drove the blade deep into the beast's eye. The creature howled in pain, but the blade was still buried inside. He stood there stunned, no weapon, no plan, no options. And just as the beast reared up for the finishing blow, a flash of steel cut through the air. From the edge of the cliff, a single strike fell. In the blink of an eye, the monster's head was cleaved in 2. Serena landed softly beside him, sword still humming from the impact. "Thanks," she said gently. "If it weren't for you, none of us would have made it." She was genuinely apologetic too. If only she'd arrived a little sooner, his weapon might still be intact. Behind them, the rookies stumbled out of the cave, covered in soot, but miraculously unharmed. Whether or not they knew who had saved them didn't matter. Everyone was alive. Back at the Adventurers Guild, Serena returned carrying the beast's severed thigh, the definitive proof of a named monster's defeat. The guildmaster and his assistant were stunned, 3 rookies protected, and a named class monster taken down. But Serena was quick to clarify, the real credit belonged to the swordsman. Without his stubborn will to stand against the impossible, none of them would have survived. The swordsman tried to speak up, wanting to give Serena credit for the final blow, but the guildmaster was already beaming at him, heaping praise, and even inviting him to join the guild officially. The swordsman declined without hesitation. To him, it had been luck, nothing more. The guild later dispatched a recovery team to retrieve the remaining supplies and materials from the cave. As they waited, Serena turned to the guildmaster and disagreed with his offer. "Someone like him," she said, "shouldn't be wasting his time as just another adventurer." The swordsman gave her a tired look, completely baffled why everyone seemed to think so highly of him. Still, Serena stepped forward and bowed her head, apologizing sincerely. What happened was her fault, she said, because she'd placed too much expectation on him. But the swordsman didn't agree. He reminded her she was the one who had landed the killing blow. She was the one who truly ended the fight. But Serena shook her head. No matter who struck last, it had been his strength, his courage, and his calm in chaos that made victory possible. More than that, she had finally fulfilled a dream she'd carried for decades, fighting side by side with the one who once saved her life. The swordsman smiled. "If anyone should be thankful, it's me," he said quietly. "Thanks to your instincts, we're all still here." Seeing how far she had come, how strong, composed, and brilliant she now was, he felt a quiet pride blossom in his chest. And in that moment, Serena turned bright red. Her heart was racing, and before she could stop herself, she was lost in the memories of the past. The next day arrived quietly. Early in the morning, the swordsman approached Coralie with a simple request. He needed a new weapon. Walking around with a broken blade didn't quite suit his title as the special instructor. Coralie was thrilled to help, but this time, Sia decided to join them too. Though she claimed it was her duty as the knight captain to personally oversee such an important task, sword selection for their top instructor, her real motive was obvious. She was jealous. Serena had helped him find a home. Coralie had already taken him shopping through the capital, and now Sia wasn't going to miss another chance to be useful. Together, the three of them made their way to a well-known blacksmith's forge. But the moment they stepped inside, the swordsman froze. The voice from inside, it was familiar. The owner of the shop turned out his old apprentice. Coralie grinned. It was meant to be a surprise. The blacksmith, Bardel, had been in the same training batch as Coralie years ago. He was the oldest among all of the swordsman's former disciples, and had always dreamed of forging the perfect blade. His goal had been clear from the start: understand the weight and soul of a sword, and use that knowledge to create weapons worthy of legends. Now, the swordsman couldn't help but smile with quiet pride. Seeing how far his disciples had come gave him a deep sense of fulfillment. Just then, Coralie stepped forward and mentioned she wanted to get her short sword reforged, but the blacksmith barely needed a glance. "Forget it," Bardel said bluntly. "Better to just buy a new one." He pointed out the obvious flaws. The blade was split down the core and riddled with nicks. It was in no condition to be salvaged. Xia, however, seemed skeptical. "Coralie doesn't strike me as someone who would misuse a weapon like this." That comment made the swordsman pause. A thought surfaced. He turned to Coralie. "When you wield this short sword, how does it feel?" She thought for a moment. "It's light, easy to swing." Swordsman narrowed his eyes. That was it. It was too light for her. So light that she couldn't feel the weapon's weight, meaning she couldn't truly wield it with precision. A sword that feels like air can't land a clean blow. Without hesitation, he picked a different weapon for her, a two-handed sword. At first glance, it seemed absurd. Coralie was small, almost delicate in frame. The moment she held the heavier sword, her expression changed. This had weight. With his approval, she made the decision then and there. This would be her new weapon. Now it was the swordsman's turn to choose, but before he could begin, the door creaked open again. Serena walked in. She approached Bardel and handed over a carefully wrapped bundle. Inside were rare materials, fragments and cores from the defeated named beast. "I want you to forge a longsword." "Why a new blade?" She smiled faintly. "This one's not for me." Xia immediately stepped forward, visibly irritated. "As the captain of the knights, I think the order of a new weapon for our special instructor should come from us." But Serena had no interest in arguing. She turned to the swordsman and simply said, "Please accept this." The swordsman saw the sincerity in her eyes. He sighed. It was hard to refuse her when she was this serious. "All right," he said quietly. The materials were extremely rare though. Bardel estimated it would take a full week to forge the new blade. Coralie, meanwhile, was eager to begin training with her new sword. She practically dragged the swordsman outside for a quick lesson. He explained, "There are two key things to know about wielding a two-handed sword. First, always aim to cut sideways, not vertically. Horizontal slashes use less wasted energy and maintain better momentum. Second, make use of the flat of the blade, the part without an edge, to control the balance." Coralie tried swinging a few times, but her movements were awkward and sluggish. Her arms trembled under the weight. "Don't use your arms," the swordsman instructed. "Your strength should come from the hips. Pivot with your body." Watching her try to adjust, he was suddenly struck by nostalgia. He remembered the very first thing he ever taught her was how to swing a sword using her hips. Time really did fly. Later that night, the swordsman relaxed at a local tavern, sipping on a mild drink. But on his way home, something unexpected happened. A mysterious girl brushed past him in the dark. Startled, she turned, only to find the swordsman's hand clamped around her wrist. He wasn't aggressive, but firm. It was instinct. "What are you doing?" she snapped, clearly shaken. The swordsman's grip didn't ease. She panicked and in an instant released a burst of fire magic to escape. By the time he recovered from the blast, she had vanished into the shadows. That girl, she wasn't just any thief. She returned to her base soon after, tossing a small pouch of stolen coins onto the table. A nearby man frowned. "That's all? Don't tell me you stashed some?" But the long-haired leader stepped in and shook his head. No, she wouldn't. She still needs to gather money for herself.